Hello and welcome to the HomeGround's monthly Big Read Unwrapped. Today we are going to explore the role of civic societies in Singapore and also explore the death of patriarchy style of government here in Singapore. The top-down approach to government was the style adopted by the late Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and was much needed for a young Singapore. It enabled policy development and a means for them to implement it down to society. This changed, however, with Goh Chok Tong's administration. When Goh Chok Tong took over in 1990, he began pushing for inclusivity and collaboration and brought his own style of consultative, compassionate government to Singapore. Governments that followed have continued Mr. Goh's approach and have become more receptive to ground-up activism and engaging with civil societies. Increasingly, we see Singaporeans more openly sharing their views and the government keener to engage them. We have also seen civic societies becoming more assertive through their advocacy and activism. With the advent of social media, its power to increase awareness about the government and its agencies cannot be understated. The smartphone's popularity has also changed the way Singapore used the internet. Seemingly overnight, everyone is carrying a mini computer with internet access. So to better understand the changing situations, we have with us political watcher Dr. Eugene Tan and social advocate Anthea. Thank you for making a time to join us on this HomeGround Big Read. So Dr. Eugene Tan is an Associate Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University, where he teaches and researches in the area of constitutional and administrative law, as well as the law and policy of ethnic relations in Singapore. Dr. Tan is a local political watcher and commentator who is regularly sought by the media for his views on matters relating to domestic policies, constitutional law, and elections. Dr. Tan was also a nominated MP between 2012 and 2014. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Ms. Anthea, also a former NMP, 2018 to 2020. And during her term, she spoke passionately about issues of social inclusion, mental health, and volunteerism. A strong believer in social advocacy, Ms. Ong left the corporate world in 2013 to focus on social entrepreneurship and advocacy efforts. Today, she juggles being a life coach, a yoga instructor, and a driver of several social causes. She has also started several social initiatives, including Hush Tea Bar, Singapore's first silent tea bar that aims to bring self-care and social inclusion to every workplace and community with a cup of tea. Thank you so much for being here. And I think I just wanted to start it off. The whole concept of the patriarchal topic that we're looking at came about from the US, where we saw abortion, the rights being removed, and civic society organizations, they came out and said, hey, that doesn't really matter because we are already on the ground. We have our own movements and we believe we can continue doing what we can and we shouldn't give up, put our hands up and say, hey, we surrender. So do you see that happening here in Singapore? I mean, have we matured to a state where our civic organizations can say that? Are we organized enough to do that? Maybe, Ms. Ong, what do you think?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. And maybe what comes to me is my own personal experience. I was actually invited in 2011 to be an NMP. But I turned it down because at the time I was still in the corporate sector and I thought, no, I'll continue to do what I'm doing on the ground because that's the way you can see change. Why would I go into politics? Because you don't do anything in politics, right? So that was my thought and I turned it down. But then obviously after 7 years, when the second invitation came, I realized you can do a lot on the ground and that's true. And you can actually put in a lot of, you can mobilize, you can galvanize, and organize different civic actions, but you still can hit the roadblock, that with structural factors that only policy changes can enable. So I think yes, even based on my own personal experience, there's definitely a lot of room for us to do lots more in terms of ground-up efforts and civic actions. Certainly a lot more we need to do to organize ourselves better. It's also what motivated me to start A Good Space, actually, to bring change makers together in Singapore. But I also think that it cannot exist on its own. right? There's always that need for that engagement between the civil society and government, because the policy changes really need to come in to enable some of these factors and obstacles that we are facing on the ground.
Have you seen a change in the civic organizations here in Singapore? I mean, are they emboldened? Do they feel like maybe technology has really given them that unique ability to mobilize? It's all about mobilizing people. And we on HomeGround, we had this article about whether People's Association was able to mobilize people on the ground. And civic organizations are like a parallel with PA.
Yeah.
And in your views, are we effectively mobilizing the masses?
As PA or on our own in the civil society?
PA is PA. I mean, they are good enough. It's more for the other smaller guys. I mean, mass is important. And I think technology has really enabled us to communicate, empower, and to pass on the message.
Yeah. I mean, certainly it's changed, Kevin. I think social media has definitely changed the face of how civic organizations in the civil society come together. But I would still say that, you know, a lot of these groups are still smallish, you know, and they're ground-up efforts. And so unless there is actually a bit more of a concerted, intentional effort to bring everyone together, it's very likely, and I've seen that with my own eyes and my own personal experience, we tend to operate in silos, which is such a pity. I mean, never mind about trying to get strength in numbers, but actually there's so much cross-pollination that would be helpful. Because some of the things that you learn in, say, the disability sector, why can't you use it for the elderly sector, for example, right? Instead of keeping these efforts separate. So yeah, I think definitely it's helped a lot in terms of ground-up efforts, social movements, being able to mobilize folks through social media, the internet, WhatsApp. You know, that's definitely a lot easier than before. But I still think that there's a tendency for us to stay in our own silos.
I guess staying in the own silos is like you need to be the alpha. You know, there is this need that I want to be the alpha. I don't need what you have learned. I will relook at what I can learn.
Yeah.
And just take a look at the animal welfare societies, the different groups of dog welfare. There are so many groups of them, and they are like packs of dogs. I need to be the alpha. I don't care if SPCA is the oldest.
Yeah,
and that doesn't bode well for, say, in the eyes of the government.
Yeah.
But Judith, you know, I don't think you can ever stop people from wanting to pursue causes that they believe in. Neither can you compel them to merge. But hopefully, you know, they could see that there is strength in unity. You know, so it need not be a merger. You know, it could be a sort of an alliance of dog welfare clubs, for example. But I think what we are probably witnessing now is this attempt, right, for people to pursue what they believe in, right? In a way, it's more aspirational. Right? So the idea that life in Singapore should not be measured in material sense, and so the need for them to want to manifest, you know, their identity, their belonging, their commitment to a particular cause, and they do it by setting up, you know, all these different civic society organizations, right? Some of which Anthea has done it herself. But I think in the end, yes, you know, if you want to talk about advocacy, something that Anthea alluded to as well, you would need to come together and in many ways try to speak with a coherent voice. Not the same voice, right? You know, but certainly, you know, demonstrate that, you know, this is not just what one particular organization feels, but it's all these organizations that are involved in this particular cause. This is what we feel ought to be done. And I think that will add weight, you know, to that particular attempt to advocate, you know, for policy change, you know, for a relaxation of rules, for example. I think that's something which we we should work towards. But I very well appreciate your point about the alpha,
The alpha,
right? That even within organizations,
yes,
that there are certain organizations who feel that we are the best, we are best able to represent this particular community, and I think that sometimes could then lead to a more fractious a perception, that civil society, or at least groups that are involved in a particular cause, are somewhat fractious, and I think that makes it harder for them to advocate for changes, for reform. So that's something which I think groups need to try to bear in mind. Because the idea is, do we want to be many separate civil society organizations, or do we want to create a movement, right? A movement by which we improve, let's say, the welfare of animals in Singapore.
Yeah. I agree. I think Eugene actually touched on a very important point. Sorry, I jumped in there. Yeah. It's very important to bear in mind that we're not talking about everyone having one opinion, one voice, but a more coherent one. And then it brings together the whole ecosystem, right? So when you have different groups within a certain sector or certain area that are actually speaking from different perspectives, but within that same cause that we're all pushing towards, then I think we allow the system to see itself, right? Because you are talking from different perspectives, and that actually carries a lot of weight. And again, going back to my own experience with the mental health space, is actually, there's just so many different areas within mental health, right? You have the downstream, which is the service providers. You have the upstream, which is more preventative. But when we all come together and say, we know what we want, to move forward, as you said, as a movement, then the different voices coming together becomes really powerful. And actually it moves. It has moved some policy changes, right? It's gotten the Medishield Review Committee, to look at, we should include self-inflicted injuries within Medishield claims, right? And stuff like that. And I think, that's an important aspect to bear in mind, that we need the civil society come together, not to merge, become one, but to actually create that opportunity for the system and the structural challenges to see itself, the system to see itself. Then I think we have a much better chance of the government starting to look at some of the policy recommendations that we're pushing for.
I was going to say that I grew up where you had politicians or opposition banging tables, scolding one another, saying flying accusations, just trying to make change in a violent, combative way. But we see it very differently. So I'm in the view that Singapore has matured politically, from a society perspective, and that's where these civic organizations really come together. We have seen so many different movements actually succeeding. So my question is the timeline. We had 377A that took almost 10 years. So how, in your experience, how can civic organizations manage their expectations? We all are nice. We will take our time, push. We follow the calm road, the promoting road. But there needs a point in time where maybe someone needs to be in parliament, or what's your view on that? I'm happy that we are mature. We are getting changes done, improving our lives through discussions, through empowerment, through awareness, through education. I'm just afraid that it might come to a point they say, hey, no, we want to... we've seen in other countries where civil disobedience, you cause a ruckus just to get your point across. So where do we draw the line, and how do we manage expectations? So sorry.
No, I think it's a good question. I think the first part of your question on the timeline, that's really hard to pin down, right? One of the things I share with many of my fellow change makers is, we must also be mindful that, we must not think that what we put in, we must see the result immediately, because actually for every cause that we push for, there are just so many factors at play, right, which are out of your control. So there's one part to it, right? Because we need to allow ourselves that space of patience. Otherwise, it's very easy to get disenfranchised, right? And many young people do feel like, okay, it's not going anywhere. It's not happening. 2 years already, still not happening, then give up, right? So that's one perspective. I would say that, remember that what we're trying to change, what we're trying to push for is complex. It's also multi-stakeholders, so many things, at play. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is that, there are also different levers of change, right? And different pressure points that you can push. So as you said, maybe do you have to be in parliament? I think with mental health, saying yes to the NMP invitation really got me way more than if I had stayed on the ground, right? I mean, not that I knew, but I felt like, so many of the things that I came out against in advocating for mental health change was actually because of policy that created the structural challenges, right? So I got lucky that way, but that's one way lah, right? But there's so many different ways that direct engagement with the policymakers, which I still do, and I'm sure Eugene also. And then there's obviously the more sort of overt, more public type of sort of advocacy. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's almost going back to what Eugene said earlier. If we are pushing, moving the needle forward for the entire system, then you almost need to get all these parts to move in tandem and to do that dance together. So yeah, I don't know whether I answered your question, but I think it needs to come from different places. One of the things I did say in one of the speeches I made on youth activism is that better for all of us who have the ability to bring the voice forward or to give the opportunity than for people who feel they have no choice and they have to take to the streets. Mm-hmm. So I think all of us have a responsibility to open up those opportunities so that there's no need, hopefully, for people who are so eager for change, feeling that there are no options to take to the streets.
Do you think it's the fear by Singaporeans, or we're brought up in the sense that the government is always right? There is this fear that the government might push back.
I think for many of us, who are involved in a civic space, I think there is certainly the view, the recognition that there will be reaction, right? Not just from the government, right, but from other groups, that may take a contrary view, to what, let's say, your organization or your group takes. So I think people who are familiar and people who are realistic about what civil society is all about would recognize that, there will be this push. If you push, someone will push harder. There'll be this pushbacks and all. So I think it's all part of the game, if I can put it that way. I don't think that there is that fear, that exists in our society. I think sometimes this notion of fear, that the government will come down hard, or that they will clamp down, or perhaps even use some of the severe laws like Internal Security Act. I think, that's I can't imagine the government using that now, on people who are genuinely seeking, to make society better. But we must expect robust responses, right? Because this is a government, it will have, any government of the day will have to defend its policies, right? They either acknowledge that we can change it, but if they think that their policies are sound, they will have to rebut, the criticisms, the challenges, that they are posed to their policies. So I think in the end, we need to shed this culture of fear. I think sometimes we unwittingly propagate it, right? When you hear in conversations like, the government has records on you, or they know how you voted and all. I think, sometimes I don't think people are scaremongering, but I don't think that's an accurate reflection of what's happening. I think when you look at society today, the sort of knuckle duster approach, right? The very tough approach to dealing with opposing voices. We're not even talking about dissent, right? But we're all trying to pursue our conception of what is the common good, or what we think society should work towards. I think there is a recognition that this is how society thrives. This is how society gets better. You have that contestation of ideas, recognizing that there are also limitations. And I think it's where that you then begin to see the vibrancy as well as the diversity of society, and you recognize that your views may not be equally shared by others around you, right? Never mind how convicted you are, right? But there could be others who take a completely different view, So I think here, in recent times, if we think about the Section 377A, I think that's been fairly instructive, in that regard, where you see the activists, right, engaging the lawmakers, engaging, the government, the executive, and then, because it's not a homogenous group, right? Some elements would say, well, look, we've been talking to the legislators, the ministers and all. It's not making any progress. Then there will be some who say, let's take the legal route, right? Let's mount a legal challenge in court. And you can be sure that within the community that there would be other voices, say, why should we, stick out like a sore thumb? We just go about our lives quietly, and not draw unnecessary attention. But this is what society is, right? I think we have come a long way, as Kevin pointed out, and I think it's very good to see people, being motivated by their causes. I think the bigger challenge now is, for us to be able to develop rules of engagement, not for the government to do that, right? But for groups to recognize,
That's right.
How is it that we can learn to live together, right? Despite our differences, even on an issue that we are all very convicted about. And I think that would make society a lot richer, right? Because we recognize that there are people who hold different values, different ideas, different views from us, and what is it that we can do, right, to try to accommodate them, right, despite our deepest differences.
But isn't that what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew had always built upon? Because Singapore, after all, is very diverse.
Well, he did, right? And I think in a way it's a reflection of the times, right? I think in if you look at the 1960s, 70s, and right up to the 1980s, I think there was that willingness to let the government take the lead. The idea that government has the resources, expertise, so they know better than us. But I think now increasingly, even the government acknowledges, and people, even if the government doesn't acknowledge, people are not going to take the view, that the government knows best. Because very often, right, people who work on these issues day in, day out, these practitioners, if I could describe them as such, these advocates, right, they are the expert on these issues, right? So it shouldn't surprise us, in recent years, the government speaks of co-creation, right? But of course, co-creation can be understood in many different ways, right? And I think we have to evolve our own understanding, but certainly the government recognizes that, we need to tap, the sort of resources, the sort of people's convictions, right? People who are willing to help a cause, help another person, not because they're expected to, not because they're going to get something good out of it, but because they sincerely feel that this is what they ought to do. And I think that's where, you want to harness, the framework that government provides, with, the sort of commitment and dedication, that comes from civil society that you may not be able to see, when government servants, for example, or public servants, were to undertake similar tasks.
I think to add to the point too, there's also an evolution, right? Clearly, if you think about the society that we are today, we're certainly a lot more educated, we're a lot more informed. I would agree with Eugene that, to have an engaged society, and therefore we need to be prepared for more contestation of ideas, is far better than just an apathetic, anything also can kind of society, right? I think that would not bode well for Singapore. And certainly it's not going to be where you want to live and thrive when everyone is just sort of, not not participative, not really engaged at all. So I think that's, I really like what Eugene said. I think ultimately the key is how do we ourselves on the ground as a people come together to write the rules of how we want to actually, again, going back to the dance, Judith knows this, how do we dance with each other? Right? I mean, we all have our favorite dance, but how do we do it? But it must not, that must not be written by the government, right? It has to be something that we, over time, create that as a people. So I think it's exciting times. In fact, I think, given my age, our age, to have seen, where we have come from, where we're no longer saying, okay lah, we'll just, comply and do whatever, but to actually speak up, to actually want to get involved, to actually initiate new movements and ground up efforts. I think it's really exciting.
So it's evident, it's obvious that the patriarchal style of government that we all know doesn't exist anymore. But given that it doesn't exist, or there's more openness, more ground...
I wouldn't say it doesn't exist, Kevin. I think
still exists.
It still exists, but more pushback, more speed. Yeah, for sure.
So on that note, can the government deliver for Singaporeans what it has been delivering, better life, better quality opportunities, given that there is a need now to talk more, debate more, and to be questioned?
No, they definitely have to collaborate more.
Yeah.
I think, Anthea mentioned about society becoming a lot more educated. But I think it's also, we in many ways have satisfied our basic needs.
Yeah.
And so we look now more to the post-material concerns, right?
Yeah.
Our sense of what is fair and just. What is it that we would like to see? What does it mean to be Singaporean? Right? What does it mean to what does Singapore represent?
Yeah. Our collective identity,
correct.
the
What
values.
What is the sort of society that we want to live our children with? So the government, in many ways, when you talk about consultation, I don't see it as something that they feel, that it's something that they are giving to the people. I take the view that they really have no choice.
Yeah.
There is no alternative.
I was going to say
and
that
I think,
too.
the only way that you can buy in, the government can buy in support for the policies and all, right, is to have people understand and appreciate, or minimally understand, right, why certain policies are there, why they're structured as such, what might be some of the limitations, because you will not be able to make a policy work or be as successful as you would like it to be, if the people don't buy into it. So when you look at the ongoing Forward Singapore initiative, right, it's a very vivid demonstration, right, that every government now wants to, or at least a new leader, right, wants to demonstrate that, that being consultative, recognizing, the value of civil society, are credentials that any new leader would want to have. I think that there is also the recognition that if you want people to have that sense of belonging, right, that they need to have a stake. And that stake is no longer expressed in terms of, your HDB apartment, or your Singtel shares.
Job,
for those of us who are old enough,
Yeah.
right? That having a stake in Singapore society, it's not about bricks and mortar. It's not about dollars and cents. It's that sense of belonging, that sense of rootedness, and I think that collectively, will also generate, hopefully, where the government is concerned, a positive response. They want people to respond positively and say, well, this is an enlightened government. They are prepared to take our views on board. They're going to consult us. We are going to co-create, our future together. So I think I would say that there's actually no alternative. In fact, now I want to look at more at how consultation is done, right? Because we know that consultation is a given, right? But the question is, how is consultation done? Do you come and consult me when you have more or less decided on the broad outlines of the policy or the draft legislation that you drafted? Or, I know in certain cases you may have to do that, right? But I think we need to look into the content, right, of what is meant by the government adopting a consultative style.
And I think the transparency that goes with that too.
Yes.
So as an example, Eugene just reminded me of an example, very recent example. So the first time there's a public consultation on mental health, right? The very first time. And I think that has come from the Interagency Task Force for Mental Health. But it's not a consultation as we expected from the sector to be. It's exactly what Eugene said. It's basically these are the preliminary recommendation for all the policy changes. Just see how you feel about this, right? But because it's the first one, so maybe the folks working on that, right, just was still coming from a little bit more of the, okay, so it's still a progress.
We give you a framework, we just edit it.
You just say yes, no. But I think it's a start. I mean, to be fair, I think it's a start. But I think the how of consultation. So how are you actually consulting with the people? But then also after that, how do you then translate it? Right? What do you do with what you have gathered from this consultation? I think that the two parts is what I'm really looking out for. And totally agree with Eugene. I don't think the government today can afford to continue with the same style, right? Because the electorate has changed. We are more engaged, more informed, more aspirational. So yeah, I don't think there's a choice lah. But I don't actually think that we're no longer a patriarchal.
Okay.
Yes.
So we talk about transparency and we talk about consultation, and I think that's where technology comes into play. And I think, and we started off talking about social media as an enabler, both from a communication, for an empowerment, from a mobilization. So where do you see the government? I mean, we know there's POFMA, government is trying to control here and there. And in your interview, I think we talked about it's a tango, between the government and the people and social media. So where are we now? I mean, it has made a change. I mean,
definitely.
It's been a lot of accountability has been there. You can check up on what was said, and instantly when you do something wrong, you get caught. So you are literally on your. I wouldn't want to be in the government at this point of time. But that is the fact. Now we are totally changed. So not only do we have a mature electorate, a group of Singaporeans, but this technology is really capturing everything and keeping track and spreading like wildfire. So tell us about the tango. I mean that has to be done. And who will step on whose toes first?
So it depends on who's the better dancer. Actually, the tango dance, as you may or may not know, there's always a leader and a follower. But in a more progressive form, that role doesn't have to stay with the same person. I mean, traditionally, of course, the guy leads and the woman follows, right? And I think that is also very metaphorical, right? Especially where the social media is concerned, that is never just the government leading. Of course, the government can use social media to put out policies, to communicate, as what Eugene was saying, get the people to understand why certain policies are being made. Certainly in a time of pandemic and a crisis, it was really good to put out, the resources and help and stuff like that. We also see a lot of politicians and ministers now using social media to make actually a lot of announcements that I think in the past you would call for a press conference.
Yeah.
Right. And now even mainstream media is reporting from what, politicians are putting out on their social media pages, right? Instead of the other way around. So I think it's definitely changing the relationship between the government and the people. This whole emergence of social media. But then you also see the other side of it, right? The government doesn't always have the upper hand. It's not always the leader, using the tango term, leader and follower. The people could actually also become the leader. And we've seen that, the GE 2020, some of the things that come up from social media and the pushback and, whether it was the whole issue with an opposition member who was fielded and all of that.
Even for the ruling party.
Yeah, even for the ruling
particular
party,
person.
right? Yeah, so I think it is a tango, right? It is a tango. And why I use tango instead of waltz, I was saying to Judith, I mean, it's not slow lah. There's a lot of passion in it, right? There's a lot of passion. Tango also talks about that embrace and that inclusion as well. So I think it is very, very much like that between the government people with the social media now being this platform. And we also all know about the ills of social media.
Correct. I mean, I see social media not only in terms of information dissemination, but the digital content, the storytelling. I think it's really changed how you and I talk, how I affect your emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that has really changed, and something mainstream media in the past
cannot do, because it's not,
yeah.
What's the term? It's not like a dialogue.
Yeah.
It's not dialogic. Right, or dialogic, but social media makes it so, right? In the past, it's like, okay, I go to mainstream media, then I announce this, but you don't feel that emotional connection with the person.
Because you would have to wait a day before it comes
that
out.
too. But I don't think it's a dialogue that you feel like you're having with, the government or the minister or whoever, that you're having a conversation with. Now you have that. So I think that changes, the form and the feel of it, the color of it. Again, good and bad, as we know. So it really comes down. I mean, social media is there, but I think it really comes down to how we.
No, so technology is certainly the enabler, as you rightly pointed out, Kevin. And to some extent, it is also a leveler.
Yes.
Right. So in the past, individuals, organizations couldn't really, they could publish, their press releases and all, but if the media doesn't pick it up, there's very limited circulation, But now, technology has enabled you to self-publish, right? So we have the term like citizen journalists and all. But if I can use the dance metaphor, it certainly takes two to tango, right? It certainly, at points, people expect the government to lead, but at times, people also expect the government to follow, or at least to be mindful of what the public feels or is concerned about. So I think in the end, what is really powerful about technology and social media in particular, is that it gives ordinary people or even organizations, right, the power to be able to set the narrative. I mean, Judith pointed out about how, if you talk about newspapers, right, which some of us are still very familiar and comfortable with, the announcement could be made, at noon today, but some people only get to read it tomorrow morning, right? But between the intervening period, right, people could go on social media and reframe, the narrative. Or come up with their own narrative, and that very often changes how people might perceive a particular announcement, right? So you see even the mainstream media now having to go online, right? Because they cannot wait till the next morning right, for people to get hold of the newspapers, and in fact I'm not even sure whether people are now really reading newspapers. I don't see that of my students. So there is a need now, increasingly, right? For governments to use technology, and so I think in the end, what we see increasingly is really in our society the how question becoming more important, right? So it's not a question of why use technology, why consult, but it's how do you use this technology? How do you consult? That increasingly will be what people would be asking about.
I think now, but also obviously for the government, those are also new data points, right? I mean, reading the sentiments of the people and the electorate through what's going on social media has become a huge part of how they read the mood and what's the pulse on the ground. I find that all really fascinating. But the how and do we continue to evolve in the way we engage through social media and not make it too inane or, that's really important. It shouldn't be. And there are also, sometimes you think, I mean, I like what Eugene said, right? That that we now even have an opportunity to reshape the narrative before the official narrative comes out.
Yeah.
And that's huge. That's very powerful. There's so much empowerment in that we should leverage.
There were some policies that were pulled back also because
exactly.
of that. Yeah.
So that's really a powerful. That's a real. Leveler, as you said, but I think it's also now giving that leader's role to the people, right? Using the tango thing. That's the leader's role that the people can play, and the voices can come out through social media.
Nice. So we spend our long lives here in Singapore, and for a very long time, our path is more or less laid out. You go to school, secondary school, JC, get a good job, and then do what we are doing now. But given that things are changing, there's more options, there's more voices, there's more opinion. Do Singaporeans now have the freedom to choose how best to lead their lives, as they choose to?
I hope Singaporeans feel that they do. I think that's important. But no man's an island, right? So even as they choose to lead the lives that they want to lead, they have to recognize that others may not share, the same sort of lifestyle, their values, their beliefs. But I think we are now in a much better position. If I look at my parents, there weren't many options for them, right? For them, they knew they had to feed, the children at home. Life primarily revolve around work and home. So whereas my siblings and I, now have opportunities, that my parents, didn't have, when at similar stages of our lives. So I take the view that, in the end, it's really, what is it that we make of the life chances, that we have? And I would say that, Singaporeans today very often would have better life chances, than the previous generation. Of course, it's going to get a lot harder. To say that, one's life chances are much better than they were before. But we mustn't forget that, we are starting from a good base now, right? And so how we lead our lives, plays that very important part. And so when you look at Singapore, right, the question of whether we will continue to be attractive, and the conversation is still about, how do we make ourselves attractive to others who are not Singaporeans, who, trying to attract them to come and live and work here. But it's also about how do we remain attractive to our own people, right? Because as we are now better educated, we have many opportunities. We also have many options in terms of where we want to live. And so it's no longer about, the nice city, it's really very much about what's the quality of your life here in Singapore. Right? So it goes back again, to what we had discussed earlier, about consultation, about making this society one in which, we feel that we truly have a stake and where we truly feel belong and rooted to.
Yeah, it's a big question. There's so many ways to unpack this. As a coach, I would say that you always have a choice, right? Because even if you say you don't have a choice, you have already just made a choice for yourself. You said no choice. I do agree with Eugene in so many parts, right? Especially if you look at it more sort of intergenerationally. Right now, I guess every moment in time is always the best ever, right? And I think we have, we are open city. We have built ourselves to be really well respected. People see Singaporeans and they know, so much of us, sometimes stereotypically, but in most times it's good stuff, right? So that opens up so much, in terms of access to opportunities, beyond living on our shores. And anyway, with technology, you can even, work here and, and still travel wherever you want to and still come back. So I think really the trajectory that we all here were probably being imposed upon. I mean, I certainly know I was like, hey, if you're a smart kid, you should go law, medicine, right? And then just get married by a certain time, have kids and all of that. That trajectory, I think, is definitely completely breaking down, in today's world. You don't have to live a certain way to feel like you're thriving, or that you can feel joy, or you feel accountable or responsible to your parents or your family. So I would say that we, if anything, would be in the best place to choose how we want to live our lives. And I think, given that we already, as Eugene said, right, we already have subsistence needs met, then what is it that you want to self-actualize? What gets you to come alive? And those are the new ways of thinking and the new awareness that I think, especially younger Singaporeans, but even all of us, we need to also start thinking that way. And I think that's going to help lift Singapore, right, to a different level. I love your term, post-materialistic, right, or post-materialism era. So what then gets us to feel that we co-own this country, this nation? What can I do to feel like I'm actually part of this? That even if I go away and holiday around and work some years overseas, I'll still come back. I remember someone's quote, I can't remember who said this, right? Love is to give them wings to fly, but roots to always come back to. And I think that's what we want, for Singapore to be, right? That we have all these opportunities, go out there and find yourself and find your gifts and strengths. But what is it that will make us finally come back? I came back. I lived overseas for a while. I came back. And I'm here. I feel like this is where I will probably finish my life. But I'm not saying that every person thinks like that. I think...
No, I mean, it's been really enlightening. And thank you for giving your time. So I think basically we live in a very exciting time, both from a young individual and grown-ups like us, that there is change.
Yeah.
Not seniors are grown-ups. But I think there is... I think that the key word that what Eugene mentioned was being able to have that ownership. I think that is what will build the roots, and I think that's what people are seeking for now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of change. There's a lot of turbulence out there, and what more than to seek comfort in Singapore and in our own homeland. But it's challenging, I think, from a government to be able to give that. To be that different form of government. So I don't envy the 4G leadership.
No, me neither.
It's tough. But I also am encouraged as a Singaporean of all the civic organizations, yourself, everyone else that is championing various causes, because everyone champions for something better to improve the lives of the person next door. So I think that is encouraging, and then I just want to thank you, and we can end on that note.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
a beautiful conversation.